Jake had seen trouble before, but not like this. Out in the desert, miles from the nearest town, his truck was his only fortress. When the masked men surrounded him, weapons drawn, they thought he was defenseless. What they didn't know was that Jake was a man who came prepared. And as they closed in, they heard the last sound they expected a gun being cocked. What would you have done in Jake's situation? Let us know in the comments. And if you love stories of real heroes standing their ground, like this video and subscribe for more. Jake had been on the road long enough to know when something felt off. The moment he pulled into the remote truck stop, he sensed it, the kind of quiet that wasn't natural, the kind that meant someone was watching. He parked his rig near the fuel pumps, the only vehicle in sight, aside from a rusted-out sedan and an old pickup truck with dark-tinted windows. The air was still, thick with the desert heat, and the setting sun cast long shadows over the lot. Jake stepped out, adjusting his belt as he scanned the area. He wasn't a paranoid man, but experience had taught him to trust his instincts. He had seen his share of bad situations on the road, desperate men looking for easy marks. And right now, he had the feeling he was about to be someone's target. Inside the gas station's small convenience store, a bored-looking clerk barely acknowledged him. Jake grabbed a bottle of water and a cup of black coffee, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, as if he wasn't fully aware of the eyes following him. As he walked back to his rig, he noticed them. 3 men standing near the pickup truck, dressed in dark clothes, their faces partially covered with bandanas. They weren't truckers. Their clothes were too clean, their boots barely scuffed from the road, and the way they stood, angled toward him but not speaking to each other, sent a clear message. They were waiting for him. Jake sighed, taking a sip of his coffee. Trouble had found him again. He climbed back into his truck, shutting the door but leaving the window cracked just enough to listen. The men hadn't moved, but now he could see their eyes shifting toward each other. Silent communication. A plan was in motion. Then, they made their move. 2 of them started walking toward his rig, casual but with purpose. The third lingered by the truck, watching. Jake didn't react yet. He simply placed his coffee in the cup holder and let his hand rest near the glove compartment. Inside, tucked beneath a road map and a pack of cigarettes, was his pistol. "Hey man," one of them called out, forcing a friendly grin. "Got a second?" Jake turned his head slightly but didn't answer. The man kept approaching. "Nice rig you got," he continued. "Hauling anything valuable?" Jake finally looked at him, his expression blank. "Just a load of bad decisions." The man's grin faltered, and his buddy let out a dry chuckle. But there was no humor in their eyes. "Oh, come on now," the first man said, stepping closer. "We just want to talk." Jake could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers flexed like they were itching for action. They weren't here to talk, they were testing him, and they were about to find out they had picked the wrong trucker. Jake didn't move, but his pulse slowed, steady like a metronome. The 2 men were too confident, too sure of themselves. They had done this before. The first guy, the one with the fake grin, took another step forward, close enough now that Jake could see the sweat on his brow. The other one flanked slightly to the side, trying to angle himself toward the passenger door. "You been on the road long, man?" Fake Grin asked, his voice still coated in artificial friendliness. "Must be tiring, huh? Probably looking to stretch your legs." Jake exhaled slowly. "Not really." The second guy let out a low chuckle, shifting his weight. "Come on, don't be like that. We're just making conversation." Jake's fingers twitched toward the glove compartment, but he didn't move yet. Not until he had to. Then, the third man, the one still near their truck, made a move. He reached into the cab and pulled something out, a crowbar. Just like that, the conversation shifted. Jake's stomach coiled tight, but he kept his face unreadable. "See?" Fake Grin said, finally dropping the act. "We figure a guy like you's got something valuable in that rig. Maybe cash, maybe something worth taking." Jake glanced at the crowbar in the third guy's hands. "That what you do? Shake down truckers in the middle of nowhere?" The second man shrugged. "Ain't personal, man, just business." Jake let out a breath. "Yeah? Well, your business just made a real bad investment." The guy with the crowbar took a step forward, swinging the metal casually in one hand. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." Fake Grin reached for the door handle. Jake moved. In an instant, He threw the door open, slamming it into Fake Grin's chest. The man staggered back with a grunt, clutching his ribs. The guy with the crowbar lunged, but Jake was already reaching into the glove compartment. The second guy cursed. "He's got a..." Click. Jake leveled the pistol at them, his voice calm. "I'd think real hard about what you do next." The men froze. The air was thick with dust and adrenaline. Jake's finger rested against the trigger. They weren't laughing anymore. The silence stretched. The thieves, once cocky and sure of themselves, were now frozen in place. Jake held the pistol steady, his finger resting just outside the trigger guard. His eyes flicked between them, reading their every twitch, every breath. Fake Grin recovered first, though his confidence had taken a serious hit. He raised his hands slightly, palms out. "All right, man. No need to get all crazy." Jake didn't blink. "Crazy is pulling a gun on an unarmed man. Lucky for me, I'm not unarmed." The second guy swallowed hard. "Look, we didn't mean nothing by it. Just a little misunderstanding." Jake let out a slow breath. "Misunderstanding, huh? You were about to crack my skull open with that crowbar." His voice remained calm, but now it had an edge, a dangerous undercurrent that sent a chill through the men standing in front of him. The third man, the one gripping the crowbar, hesitated. His knuckles had gone white, his mind racing, calculating his odds. Jake saw it coming before he even moved. Jake acted first. He took a step forward, aiming the pistol dead center. "Drop it," he ordered, his voice sharp. For a moment, it looked like the guy was going to try something stupid. But then, after a tense second, the crowbar clattered to the ground. Jake tilted his head slightly. Good choice. The men glanced at each other, their cocky bravado now completely gone. "You boys really thought you had this figured out," Jake continued, his tone cold. "But you made one big mistake." He took another step forward, barrel aimed steady. "You picked the wrong damn trucker." The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. The three thieves stood frozen, their eyes darting between each other, searching for a way out. But there was none. Jake had them cornered, his gun steady, his resolve unshaken. "Now," Jake said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen far worse than these idiots. "You're gonna start talking. Who sent you?" Fake Grin, the supposed leader, scoffed. "Man, no one sent us. We just..." Jake fired. The gunshot echoed in the desert night, the bullet striking the dirt just inches from the man's boot. He yelped, stumbling back, his tough guy axe shattering. "You want to try again?" Jake growled. Crowbar guy was the first to break. All right. We weren't sent by nobody, okay? We saw your rig, saw you alone, figured it'd be an easy score." Jake let that sit for a moment. Then he chuckled. A dry, humorless laugh. "You figured wrong." The thieves looked at each other, the realization sinking in that they weren't getting out of this with their pride intact. "Here's how this is gonna go," Jake continued, stepping forward. "You're gonna strip down." Fake Grin blinked. "What?" Jake cocked his head. "You heard me. Boots, belts, jacket strip." "You can't be serious," the third guy muttered. Jake fired another round, closer this time. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Muttering curses under their breath, the men hesitated, but the cold steel of Jake's gun made the decision for them. One by one they shed their jackets, their belts, their boots. Jake kicked their weapons into the dust, then nodded toward the desert road behind them. "Now, walk." Fake Grin stiffened. "You can't just leave us out here." Jake stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "You were ready to leave me out here, weren't you?" No response. Jake smirked. "Didn't think so. Now walk." With no other choice, the three humiliated men began their long march into the desert, their stolen pride trailing behind them. Jake holstered his weapon, watching until they were nothing but silhouettes against the horizon. They'd survive, maybe. If they were lucky, they'd find someone willing to pick them up before the coyotes got too curious. One thing was certain. They'd never forget the lesson they'd learned tonight. And they'd never mess with the wrong trucker again. Jake stood by his truck, the desert wind whipping around him as he watched the silhouettes of the thieves disappear into the horizon. He let out a slow breath, running a hand down his face. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind only exhaustion and the weight of what had just happened. He had been on the road long enough to know that danger lurked in the quiet places, that there were always people looking to take what wasn't theirs. But tonight, he had reminded them that some men weren't to be messed with. The sound of distant engines rumbled in the night. Another trucker passing through, maybe heading to the same diner Jake had stopped at earlier. He knew word of this encounter would spread. Truckers talked, and stories like this had a way of becoming legends among the long haulers. Jake wasn't looking for glory. He wasn't looking to be some kind of hero. He was just a man who refused to be a victim. He climbed back into his cab, setting his gun back into the glove box. As he adjusted his seat, he caught his own reflection in the side mirror, dust-covered, tired, but still standing, still moving forward. That was the thing about life on the road. It wasn't about how tough you were. It wasn't about how many fights you'd won. It was about knowing when to stand your ground. The thieves had thought they could take from him because he was alone. They had thought strength came in numbers. But they had never faced a man like Jake before. A man who had been through worse. A man who knew that out here, in the open road and the endless desert, the only thing that truly mattered was resilience. As his truck roared back to life, Jake let out a slow chuckle. He'd let those men walk away tonight, stripped of their weapons, their pride, and their arrogance. That was worse than any beating he could have given them, because they weren't just running from him anymore. They were running from the lesson that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Jake pulled onto the highway, feeling the familiar hum of the engine beneath him. He had miles ahead, roads stretching endlessly into the dark, and he was fine with that. Somewhere out there, there would be another fool looking to take what didn't belong to him. And when that time came, Jake would be ready. Because some men just weren't meant to be messed with. Now, what do you think? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand your ground? Ever been underestimated by the wrong people? Tell us your story in the comments. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more real stories from the road.